the end of the day, you really do want to test yourself against the best. And I'm very lucky that I've had some incredible rivalries over my career, and I think the fact that my generation of players are still right up there in the top of the world rankings, well into their 30s. You know, you've got like Gaultier still at world number one. You know, Shabaghi came through when he was young. Shabana's not long retired. You know, Rami's still potentially the favourite for any event he enters. James has come back into the top 5, final of Dubai. You know, these are all my generation of players. I've had a rivalry with all of them. Each one of them has brought a totally unique challenge, one which I've sort of had to go away and improve my own game on the back of. You know, I had to go and do my homework. I think I've got a list of condition games that I've got a Greg game that when I know that I might play Greg, I've got a Greg game that I practice, I've got a Rami game that I practice. So you're practicing tactics that are appropriate to these players. And, you know, I've played some of those rivals in big finals. You know, I've played Greg, British Open, US Open, World Open finals, James, Commonwealth, British Open, World Champs finals again, Rami, massive matches, all or nothing for world number one spot, for example, British Open finals, etc. Shabana, TOC, 2 massive matches always ring a bell with Shabana in TOC. Mo, you know, to have a rivalry with someone who's 11 years your junior is a pretty cool thing. You know, I'd love to have been 3 years age difference, and then that would have been a hell of a physical battle there. I'm not saying I would have come out on top, it just would have been amazing to watch, because there's been a couple of times he's got me on the back foot because his physicality is probably more raw than mine at this stage in the career. You know, so I have to think my way out of jail against him rather than, you know, going totally physical. And he really doesn't care about anything other than winning a squash match. You know, you see some heavy movements at 9-all, he doesn't care, like, and that's fine. We both fight. You know, he says it's like a war out there, and you know, I think I'm at a point in my life that it's not a war, it's a game of squash. You know, at one point I was thinking exactly the same. That doesn't mean that I don't want it as much as the younger guys. I think a couple of years ago I worried that because I wasn't willing to go to war, like the war of words, and go beyond just playing squash, that meant that I'd lost my edge, that I'd lost my hunger, and I was worried about that for a period of time. And then I realised that actually it's a positive, because I now want to win, but I don't need it. Whilst, you know, I'm killing myself to try and win when I'm on there, it is easier to come off and, you know, take that on the chin. And I think this season I've almost found a balance between the two. I want it more than I've done in a couple of years, but I'm happy whatever the result. Fans from outside the sport picked up on mine and James's relationship. For example, the fact that we are, the geographical proximity has been big. The fact that we are totally different characters. You know, obviously Pontefract is a club synonymous with, you know, its atmosphere, its travelling fans. You know, the atmosphere they create at tournaments ever since Beach was, you know, at the top of the game. And you know, those guys are brilliant. They create a great atmosphere. They've helped me. You know, they created a great atmosphere. I'm like, I don't want to lose to James today, because those guys are annoying me in the crowd, shouting for him every point. You know, these little things go through your head, and I think the fact that we play different games, different characters, that we don't particularly get on, has all added sort of to the mix. I had some incredible battles. Probably the one where we fell out, 2009 British Open final. I wasn't particularly mature on court in those days. A bit like, you know, a bit rash. You know, thought it was life and death in those points. I remember, you know, I've been honest about this in my book and in interviews in the past. You know, gave him a bit of sledging, asking him whether his dad taught him to, you know, the Pontefract way was always to play the ball and not ask for lets. And I thought he was taking a few, you know, looking for a few cheap strokes in that match. So I sort of played on that scenario and said, oh, maybe they do. You know, they do look for strokes and Pontefract sort of thing, and he took it, you know, a bit personally, managed to get inside his head, and you know, that's part and parcel. I don't think I'd really do that sort of stuff anymore. I'd concentrate on the game, but you know, different players view these things differently. James didn't like that, and our sort of relationship sort of suffered. Other players, you know, leave it on court. That's me, but we're very different. There's no right or wrong, and I sort of found my edge that day where I needed it, really. You know, it's a tactic. You know, Mohamed Shabana uses it all the time. You know, he tries to get inside your head so you stop focusing on the game, and that's where I was at that point. James was outplaying me, and his skill, you know, the marksman, he puts the ball in the four corners better than any player, you know, probably ever in the game. Certainly, you know, from back to front, you know, that long drop is incredible. And you know, I've been fortunate to be on the right end of some tough matches against him and managed to impose my physicality against James. But he's someone who I've never relaxed against for 1 second, even when that run was going, you know, when it was extending longer and longer, because I knew that it could change any moment. And, you know, he deserved getting the edge on me finally this year in New York. And if there was ever a match I had to take on the chin, it was that one, because, you know, I had my fair share. And, you know, wouldn't it be amazing if we could go out playing the Commonwealth final again together in April? And I think you know, James is someone that our relationship, you know, we're never going to be the best of friends. We've been great rivals, different characters, totally different way we play, you know, on and off the court, totally different. But you know, there'll be a lot of respect there, especially at the end of our careers. I think that period in 2013 sticks out with Greg, when he absolutely hammered me, embarrassing. It felt about 30 minutes in the US Open final, and 2 weeks later I beat him in the Worlds in Manchester. And the thing with Greg is we're both really good friends. He's probably one of my best friends on the tour, which is really remarkable considering most of the time we wanted to kill each other during our career. I remember Rotterdam, we were literally just every other word we were swearing at each other on the court. You know, it wasn't particularly friendly, but he's always been really good at sort of leaving that rivalry on the court, and incredible competitor. And his sort of thing is trying to tip him over the edge. Occasionally you can tip him, and that tipping point has got further and further and further away as he's matured throughout his career. And last season it didn't seem like there was a tipping point when he went on that run, so credit to him for sort of being able to rein in that little bit of eccentricity that he has. But he's incredible athlete, one of the best movers I've ever played against speed wise. You know, you have to stop him and take that movement away from him. And times when you have to, you know, it's like a car, you know, you change gear. You know, you can't always stay in the top gear. You have to come out and maybe be patient for a minute, then have a moment of being aggressive. And that's why squash is such a game of chess, especially at the highest level. Probably the rivalry that made me look most sort of introspectively about my own game, you know, totally sort of trying to reinvent myself. You know, there's always bits about Gaultier you need to go away and work on, James, bits you need to work on, Shabana, Shabagi. But with Ramy, the way he played was something that I had to go away, and there was a few times where I had no answers, absolutely no answers, didn't know what was hitting me, and I had to go away and work on my game to a different level. He brought me to new heights. He brought the game to new heights. The way that he played, he was a totally different player than this game of squash I'd ever seen before. The way he took the ball early with no backswing, you know, his flamboyance, his attacking game, you know, angles that he could create from anywhere, and you know, getting that balance between trying to restrict him but not being negative, still being aggressive when the time comes, and closing down the court. And you had to get it right to the... I've never played anyone where you had to get it right to that nth degree before. You know, the margin for error was like basically zero. He was somebody who just took me so much out of my comfort zone, and it was never... And if you enjoyed it for a second, you probably lost the next 5 points. You know, you couldn't afford to enjoy it. You know, you might have enjoyed the challenge of trying to beat him in practice, and then after the match had finished. But when you were on there, it was hell trying to sort of, you know, it felt like you're trying to swat a million sort of bats away, because it was just happening so fast. And you know, he's incredible, and he was a catalyst for a lot of improvements in my game. We had a great rivalry for a couple of years where we were back and forth, world number one. We had a match in Saudi in 2009 where the winner got to world number one for the very first time, and sweat was coming through the bottom of our shoes. It was so humid, 2 hours on court, and then beating him in the British Open final in 2012. That was probably one of those days when your game plan came together and you played to that nth degree, and it all went well. But what charisma he's got, and You know, he's been a big miss with his injuries over the years. And as I said, I think it's been a pretty special generation that's everyone's different, everyone's been different, everyone's been unique, and we've all brought the best out in one another.